Oh, it's not me. Just waiting. Richard Huntington's not here. He just must have popped out for a second.
He was standing up here, wasn't he?
Is he in there somewhere? He's probably coming through. Let's give him a second. There he is.
Is that him? Is this him?
Yep.
Welcome back. Welcome back. We're going for a change of pace for our last session. It's going to take a different format, and I'm shortly going to introduce the man who's going to lead on this. Yesterday at conference we had one of our think tanks on the topic of back to basics, so this is a continued deep dive into that topic, and our chair today was at that think tank yesterday, so can feedback where they got to and then lead us on to an important debate which also does one other thing. It reminds us that we're launching the 2018 Effectiveness Awards this week. And we're drawing in this last session on some of the winning papers from 2016 to whet all of your appetites to start your entries if you haven't done so yet. So I'd like to welcome up Carlos Grande. Carlos is IPA Editor of Effectiveness and formerly of the FT, formerly of Walk. He's an invaluable source of knowledge for us at the IPA and keeps the continuous flow of our content relevant. So welcome to Carlos. Over to you.
Hello. Okay, well, thank you for staying with the morning. We hope this is going to be an entertaining segment. We don't have any charts or any PowerPoint for you, but we do have some penetrating stories of effectiveness in the digital era. And we're going to also talk about the forthcoming 2018 Effectiveness Awards. So you can treat this as an opportunity for early intelligence on those. We're going to have the convener of judges here, so it's a chance to ask them the questions about what you need to do to impress the judges in April. So in terms of the format, we are going to start by showing a short film clip about direct line. Now, this is a segment from a much longer film, which is part of the invaluable series created by our partners at Thinkbox that tell the brand story of Effectiveness Award-winning cases. And you can find the full film on YouTube from now, but we're going to show just a segment of it which talks about the implications of the case. Unfortunately, we have one of the authors of the case here today in terms of Richard Huntington, from Saatchi Saatchi. So after we've watched the segment, Richard and I will talk through some of the learnings and insights from the film and what's happened since. We're also going to show a short clip about the Economist case from the 2016 awards. If you don't know that case, it's an interesting combination of, is Marsha still here, content, but from a reputable content provider, but also technology in terms of programmatic media and contextual marketing and customer insight. And the reason why both these cases we think can be framed within the back to basics is that they are built on an exploration of fundamentally what consumers wanted from the brand and a challenging of some of the perceptions in the market about what these particular brands could deliver. So that's the format. We will show the films. I will invite the rest of the panel up for discussion on stage, and to give them, both of them their due. That's Neil Peace from the Group Digital Strategy Director, and Neil Godber, who is the convener of judges in the 2018 awards. And Neil will also talk about a couple of other cases we think this kind of approach is relevant to, but also we will talk about, as I say, the forthcoming awards. So, with no more ado, I think we should start.
The business was in real decline, declining share of declining market, and it was a pretty woeful place to find ourselves. Reboot has really turned around that performance pretty much from day one, pretty much from the launch of the campaign. We've seen brand health improve, customer numbers have improved, the brand has been in growth every quarter since we've launched Reboot. We've seen marketing effectiveness improve, quote volumes improve. It's been a real success story.
Prize plum.
Sorry?
It goes well with Magnolia.
Return on media investment is absolutely critical. Direct Line spend a huge amount of time analysing every line on the media plan to understand how it is working and how it's driving back. What we were able to see from this campaign was a 40% improvement in return on investment for the TV spend.
So there's no doubt that TV is really critical for us. It's sort of symbolic of the idea, but also it's incredibly efficient. And because the advertising construct is working so well, it's actually one of our best returning media lines from a marketing effectiveness point of view. So the win-win is it has great cut through, feels very sort of emphatic, but also delivers the numbers. So it's sort of the first line on the media plan. And I know the world's going digital and we still do some of that, but it's still the first line on the plan.
Well, I think the most critical thing that this campaign did was it readdressed how people were thinking about direct line insurance and the quality of the product. And that's critical in a market that is particularly commoditised and price-led, and people looking for the lowest possible price for their insurance. Actually, what this did was get people to understand that quality insurance, that high-performance insurance, was important, and was particularly important to the people we were specifically talking to.
Can you send me a new one?
Sure. Now, your daughter Connie comes home at 3:30 in the p.m., correct?
Uh-huh.
That gives us 40 minutes to get the fudge out of Raj.
Well, I didn't grow up as a boy imagining that I would really want to work in insurance, but now I've been in it 5 years. It is astonishing how multifaceted and interesting it is. What I mean by that is with the advent of driverless cars, connected homes, artificial intelligence, blockchain, the sharing economy, it probably is the sector with the single highest propensity to be disrupted quite radically. In a nutshell, insurance has been a business of restitution, putting things right when they've gone wrong. But in the future, I think insurance will become a business of prevention, stopping things happening before they've gone wrong. And insurance will become more of a service of prevention than a process of restitution. The brand have been market leader, and so probably the biggest thing that the campaign has achieved is to restore that market leadership and the market leadership mentality that we can do big things, bold things, and triumph and achieve our commercial objectives, but also really re-engage the organisation and be proud again for the things that it did for many years. And rediscovering that lost sense of pride, I think, is the thing that I relate to most as the campaign's biggest achievement. Over and above all the numbers, it's really reconnected the organisation back to its purpose.
I'm a big believer that when we do our job really well, it's about effectiveness, not just efficiency. It's about having an effect. And also not taking no for an answer. I mean, not accepting. I don't see why any brand should have to accept the market conditions they operate in as sort of given. I mean, Direct Line decided they were not going to accept that price comparison websites were inevitable way this industry was going. They refused to be on it, and we've turned that into a virtue.
The importance of a brand particularly in a market which can be seen as quite commoditised, and actually a product that you don't necessarily ever want to use, is really, really important. Because actually what people are buying isn't an insurance policy. What they're buying is kind of peace of mind that everything in their life is going to carry on going as smoothly as it possibly can do. So yeah, the brand perception and the brand behind that is critical.
The bad news is that Joey here is going to have to remove your ball cock. Huh? The good news is that Joey's an emergency plumber, and that's covered under your Direct Line Home Plus insurance. I'll leave you two to it.
For me, the first thing is that Marketing 101 is absolutely alive and well. So whilst how you take campaigns to consumers might have changed with new technology and new media, the golden rules still apply. You know, who are your customers? What do they really want? What's their unmet need that your brand is uniquely placed to deliver? Then how do you get your business to deliver that? And then how do you communicate that to consumers in a really compelling way? And that's what I learned back at university many years ago, and it still applies today. And I think that's something that I'll take with me into future marketing tasks and challenges. But I think that's a real lesson to it.
Well, it wasn't something we set out to achieve. You know, this notion of a golden thread, it gets talked about, but what does it really mean? But it was, as we post-rationalise it, that the industry was kind of broken in terms of what it actually does at the point of need had been forgotten, dominated by price. Certainly a broken marketing team in terms of engagement, capability, confidence, pride, and a bit of a broken brand. You know, it was in systemic decline. And so isn't it amazing that the unmet need and the core insight that holds everything together is about fixing? And I think in fixing consumers' needs, we also fixed, to some extent, the brand, the marketing team, the business, and without sounding arrogant, I think the sector, because now we're seeing others follow us down the route of differentiating and adding value to customers.
Okay, Richard, would you like to join me on stage?
Would you like me?
Oh, I mean.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's place that in context. When this work began, Direct Line had faced 5 consecutive years of commercial decline. It was confronted by price comparison websites, which seemed to be the go-to tool for people to use to compare brands, and it was losing share to its rivals. So how did you arrive at the idea that the fixer was the kind of organising principle, not just for the advertising campaign, but for the organisation?
Right. Okay. I think it was approaching that problem, and it was a pitch, and lots of agencies were involved, and there was an amazing client brief that said we want to deliver the 3rd revolution in insurance. They felt that they'd revolutionised insurance in 1985 when they'd launched. That the price comparison websites, and notice that horrible little meerkat is over there, they created the 2nd revolution, and they came to the group of agencies saying we want the 3rd revolution in insurance. Like, so long on rhetoric, and there were some reasons to believe that they might be able to pull this off. But the journey started for me in trying to figure out what the market conversation was in which Direct Line was inevitably going to lose. So if you say, well, right now the conversation in the insurance market is about price and cover at the point of purchase, which is what PCWs had encouraged us all to think. That's all that matters. That was an argument we could never win. It was a conversation we could never win. And what we had to do was literally drag the market to a point where the debate was around how does insurance work at the point of need. So point of purchase to point of need. And that was the starting point. And then you kind of go, well, you know, is there anything about this brand or these products that seem to work particularly well? And we came up with this idea that the Direct Line represented high-performance insurance, and then you kind of go, well, that's interesting, because if we're high-performance insurance, then de facto the others are sort of low-performance insurance. That's kind of helpful and neat. And it was then in discussing what high-performance insurance that works when you really need it to, when the shit hits the fan, that we then kind of got to, what they really do is fix things. And it was really, really scarily quick to get to Harvey Keitel and his character in Pulp Fiction.
How do you sell an idea like that? Because it isn't an obvious jump from the fixing idea to the Harvey Keitel character from Pulp Fiction.
But it seemed obvious. I mean, you know, like, I think the hard work was before. Yes, the hard work was sort of before figuring out what right Direct Line had to win in this environment. You know, half the business had been eaten by price comparison websites over about a 5 or 6 year period, and there was nobody would give you any odds on a direct insurer being able to fight back against this sort of onslaught of high salience, low-cost insurance websites. And so I actually think by the time we got to, well, it's about fixing things and putting them right, and I had this visceral sense, we might talk about this because it came out of a very ill-fated trip to Vietnam where I lost everything except the clothes I was wearing, something I now call method planning. You know, I was inhabiting this world of how does it really feel when things go wrong? Like, you know, you lose your wallet, your bike gets nicked, your home gets broken into. I think your profound sense is, I just want it to be an hour ago. or I just want it to be yesterday, before any of this happened. And that actually, great insurance wasn't about handing out cash, it was about turning the clock back, literally. You know, putting back your life back to exactly how it was before. And madly, it was one of those moments which I think if you work in our industry, you live for, which is getting into a lift in Bromley, having done the Q&A with the client and talking to Paul Silburn, who was the ECD at the time, and he'd go, do you know what? Genuinely, it's a bit like Mr. Wolf in Pulp Fiction, you know, when they've blown out the brains of that bloke on the back seat of a Chevy Nova, and Mr. Wolf comes around and tidies it all up, and do you know what, if he could probably do that, he'd probably sort out your broken phone. It's that sort of, I don't know how that happens, that's just mad.
And how do you, because what the film, the full film tells you, and the full case study, it isn't just about communications, this was about reorganising the supply chain to actually deliver on that promise. It was about retraining people in customer service. It was about different propositions. So how did you market the marketing to make sure that message got through the Direct Line organisation?
Well, I think to a certain extent the marketing marketed itself, and for all of our belief now in inside out, building campaigns, building programs of transformation from the inside out, clearly there's a point at which an organisation sees itself in the outside world and goes, ooh, that's what we do now. So I think that's an important part of it. It has to be said that Direct Line had got themselves to the point in 2014 where they knew they were in crisis and they knew they had to do what it would take to get them out of that. Part of it was go and have a chat with some advertising agencies, but they'd also started to reformulate their propositions. So there was always something. We had a clear clue that they were prepared to do what it took. But I've got to say, when we first, so not the pitch, in which Kerry and Mark, you saw in the film, had a kind of visionary sense of this is what we have to do, but we went and redid the pitch to the whole marketing organisation, the Direct Line Group, and there was stunned silence at the end of it, and Mark Evans said, you know, hasn't nobody got any questions? And somebody simply said, well, this is all great, but this isn't us, we can't do this. And I think the big challenge, which they sort of talked to a little in that clip, was convincing the organisation that it was this company. This was what it was always about, what it was born to do, and it had the right to fight.
So was there something in the Direct Line DNA that, having started as a disruptor and become a market leader, made it easier or harder to do a corporate reboot? Because wouldn't the temptation have been to go back to tried and tested approaches? You know, we did it once before this way, why do we have to take this gamble?
Yes, okay, so I think having been the original disruptor was helpful in a sort of rhetorical sense, I think, but by the time you'd got from 1985 to 2014, a lot of that had been lost. A lot of it, I think, was beaten out of them by ownership by RBS before they IPO'd in 2012. And they just lost it, and I remember, I think sometimes, like, one of the reasons to go to the client's factory or office and wherever and just absorb it. I remember going around our first visit and there were blue paw prints bloody everywhere because that organisation really liked Churchill. But there was no sign of Direct Line. I had this real sense that they'd lost pride in the brand. And so a lot of the conversation was, you know, your communications aren't working for you, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. Actually, you've lost your mojo as an organisation, you don't believe that you have a right to win, and also this category has gone clinically insane because it's seriously lost the plot. I mean, if the reason to, you know, take up an insurance is you get a fluffy toy, that's a category that really has lost any sense of what it exists to do in the world.
Do you think, more generally, brands are loath to challenge the kind of market wisdom? Because obviously in this example we've got a case of challenging this idea that you have to be on price comparison websites.
Yes, I mean, just to be clear, that's our business model. We can't be on price comparison websites, so that was never an option. I mean, but I mean, lots of people going, well, you know, clearly the right thing to do is go on price comparison websites, and of course, Direct Line has spent a long time saying we're not on price comparison websites. To which people would go, yes, I don't know why, because you're incredibly expensive. So we had to find a way to change the conversation where it wasn't a good idea to be on price comparison websites. Whether it's challenging acceptance, I think it's really unfortunate that more organisations don't. The phrase I'd use is refuse to accept defeat. You know, give in. And the example I'm really amused by at the moment is, you know, any of us who are working with a distiller, a big drinks brand or business 15, 20 years ago would have heard the mantra that, you know, like the future of white spirits is vodka, gin's dead, is never, you know, it's pointless. And then over here, you know, a bunch of people go, no, gin's brilliant. And so the big distilleries now are fighting over themselves to find artisan gin brands. It's just a good example to me that you don't have to accept the fate of the market. You can decide if you've got enough, you know, determination and intelligence and imagination, you can defeat accepted wisdom. You have to be an organisation that's prepared to do what it takes, though, and you will know that so many conversations we have, it's we need to turn around the future of this brand. But we've got to do it with these assets or this approach or this accepted wisdom. So what's joyful, I think, is when you find a client or an organisation who's going, no, I will do what it takes. Mm-hmm. I will do what it takes.
And the client mentioned there that one of the great benefits of this campaign was the kind of growth or return to confidence within the organisation as a culture, confident in what they do, confident in how they market it. Is it the agency's job to build that confidence in clients?
I'm not sure I'd say it's the agency's job, but I think it's something that, you know, the members of this organisation are uniquely well placed to do, because, you know, I've talked about this a little bit before, but for all that the Fixer is at the heart of governing new product and proposition, consumer experience on and offline, internal culture and communications, and it's all very sensible. There's nothing like that when you know, our ability to create this kernel of confidence that goes out into the marketplace and starts a client sort of thinking, oh, you know, actually maybe we're quite good at this. And I remember it distinctly when we did the dance. I don't know if you remember, in 2009 we did a sort of flash mob for T-Mobile in Liverpool Street, and suddenly that client,
people know that campaign,
they sort of perked up and went, oh, you know, that we do that, we're kind of cool, brilliant. And I think that there is a power in what we do to give an organisation a sort of sense of, you know, wow, we're not actually as crap as we think we are. And so often what we're doing is helping clients move from, or organisations, from a lack of confidence to a sort of belief in itself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the sort of the intangible or the soft skills of what we all do and what a pitch is often about. Not so much the solution sometimes, but just the kind of confidence.
And given that the title of this session is about marketing one-on-one and back to basics in the digital era, one of the points made in the film is that TV was central to this particular campaign. There were other channels used, and they were used in different ways, but you were doing things like putting your ads on the X Factor. So why is that? I mean, what did you base the confidence that would work still in this era? What did you base? Did you have pre-testing evidence, or was it IPA studies, or was it history of?
Well, you know, between a client going, well, Winston Wolfe, brilliant, let's do that, and it actually happening, a huge amount of reassurance. So Kerry and Mark were visionary in their ability to see how something might work, but not all of the organisation felt that way. So we did a huge amount of work with the nursery qualitatively and Hall & Partners quantitatively to prove that this would work, because of course at one level this is clinically insane to employ a gangland fixer as a brand spokesperson for an insurance company. So that whole journey had to be worked through. I think the client was always looking for, as Mark says, a golden thread or a singular big idea that he could sit at the heart of that brand. And so I think there was an inevitability that television was going to be a really important part of that. I'd say probably that intervention, because what we were able to do was turn around its commercial performance almost on a pinhead, and I don't think that outside TV we would have been able to do it. It would be much slower build. So it was always, I think, going to be part of, and getting a vehicle that was going to work superbly well in that media was desperately important.
And again, Mark, the client, talks about the future of the insurance category and the potential for disruption, but also a new role which is more on the kind of preventative side than the fixing side, or in addition to fixing, perhaps being more sort of forward-looking. Now, is that something that agencies should do more of? Look 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ahead to what effectiveness means in that era that's coming, rather than just today?
Well, yeah, the short answer
How do you do it?
Yes.
And why are you well equipped?
Well, I think what I'd like to say, I think that increasingly the key role of the CMO is to understand the future revenue sources or sources of revenue for an organisation, because they're uniquely placed within large organisations to connect the inside and the outside. And I think it's their job to be kind of scouting ahead and working out how this business works in the future. I think agencies are in a really powerful position to act as sort of consigliaries in that journey. We've just got to be better at being able to see the path ahead, and less obsessed with sort of meaningless, twaddly trends presentations about millennials wanting to care about the world in which they live. So I think a bit more muscular and less ornamental. Otherwise we won't have a role if we're just doing pretty pictures.
And just one final question on Direct Line before we'll move on to The Economist. How important was it that Direct Line does have this direct connection with its end customer? Because some of the brands in this room, or represented by the agencies in this room, don't have a direct relationship with the customer. I'm thinking of an FMCG brand, where they don't have the data, they don't have the customer insight necessarily first-hand. They might be working through a distribution channel or some kind of intermediary. So what kind of advantage is it?
I'm not sure there was much of an advantage. I mean, we had the data on our customers, but the insight wasn't about mining the data around our customers. That was genuinely a universal insight around how people feel when things go wrong in their life. And we were blocked out of the main distribution channel in this, and the default consumer behaviour in this category. So I'm not sure how much of an advantage it really was that we could go direct. And all of us can access those visceral insights that exist in human nature. We don't need, though it is helpful, we don't necessarily need to have that direct consumer relationship. And also, we're talking about insurance here. I mean, yes, we may have a direct relationship for 33 days in a year. I mean, the rest of the time, and this is why we've been doing things like Fleet Lights last year, and then last week...
Will you tell us a little bit about Fleet Lights?
Yeah. Well, the point of Fleet Lights is fixing outside the insurance category, because I'm a bit of a devotee of Paul's Anatomy of Humbug book, and the idea that we should be embracing a kind of every way in which a brand and its communications might work. And we've built a model that allows Direct Line to create fame and momentum outside the category. And what we simply do is take our fixing prowess, and in the first instance we took it to street lighting, because street lighting lights streets and not people. So we have now a pilot with the lifeboat service, lighting lifeboats when they go to rescue. And last week we launched a project which is trying to improve bringing technology to road crossings. All of that is about working ahead of the point at which somebody goes, I've got a renewal letter, shit, I need to sort out my insurance. And literally nobody wanted to have a conversation about us or any other insurance brand in the 300 odd days that the rest of the year. And I think that's desperately important that we find ways to do that.
Okay. I think we'll pause there and show, unless anyone has a burning question about Direct Line at this stage, we will take questions at the end. Okay, let's show The Economist.
Even a brand as successful and established as The Economist can completely transform people's perceptions. We were going to be measured on getting a brand new audience to start reading some of the content and then move them on to subscriptions.
The targets were very aggressive, in fact. We needed to deliver at least 9,500 subscribers.
We ended up building audiences in a completely new way, using digital techniques and programmatic techniques. Right from the ground up, we moved away from TGI and small sample-based means of building audiences and started to look at actually a much bigger pool of people, The Economist's own subscriber base. We saw that some people were much more interested in technology or politics, and eventually we had segments which were defined by, what their passions were.
This was ultimately a programmatic campaign. Programmatic is about how we get the right message in front of the right person. We can see from their behaviour what they're interested in, and we can connect the creative work to that. To do that, our partners, built a bespoke piece of technology that effectively used existing technologies, brought them together, but allowed us to scan the content of a page, the page you're reading right now, and match that to the content that we had from The Economist.
As we brought them in, we would cookie the user. The dynamic ad server was able to understand what content had been consumed. We know that you're into politics, so actually we've got these 8 politics articles. The machine thinks that this one is the most appropriate for all of the various attributes that this cookie, that this user has. And that's where we started to get some really, really startling results.
So the way it worked was that there were 2 routes to creative execution. One was genuine dynamic advertising that was created on the fly, that we tested, and the other was a bank of pre-existing crafted work that we developed that we would match on the fly. While that really unlocked the power of the machine to the max, they never worked as effectively as crafted work. So our target when we were briefed was to draw in 9,500 new subscribers. That was an annual target.
We actually bust through those numbers within 9 days, can you believe it? 9 days.
Ultimately, we actually drove 64,500 new subscribers. Overall, those 64,500 subscribers will generate over their lifetime just under £52 million in lifetime revenue. That's been a massive success for the business.
So you had to have good tech understanding amongst the creative teams, amongst the data teams, and amongst the tech plumbing teams, as well as the strategy guys.
It was a real instance of ripping up the rule book, looking at it with a complete fresh pair of eyes, actually a little bit of allowing your digital team to run amok.
But I think there are a number of learnings that we can take out. One of the big ones for me is that balance of man and machine. We had this great technology that hadn't existed before, but to really unlock it, you've got to have the power of a great human creative mind. And when you bring those 2 together, that's when you deliver massive success.
Okay, I'd like to invite Neil Peace and Neil Godber up on stage. So Neil Peace, let's put that in perspective in terms of what we saw was a lot of evidence of growth in subscriptions as a result of your campaign, and that was the main business objective. But there was also a fundamental brand issue here, wasn't there? That people who didn't read The Economist had perceptions about the type of brand it was, the type of content it offered, and whether it was relevant to their interests. So can we start from that point of view in terms of how did you identify what the business problem was there and how go about solving that problem?
I think when we started working with The Economist, they were off the back of an incredibly successful 2 decades of out-of-home campaigns, and these are iconic out-of-home campaigns that had done a great job as positioning The Economist as a must-read for the corporate world, as almost like a banking Bible. And so that's great, and they'd seen a lot of growth from that over the years, but they'd seen that that growth was starting to plateau, and actually perhaps that audience was becoming a little bit saturated. So we could clearly kind of see that, and through some of the great work that our friends at BBDO had done in terms of the focus groups. We could really start to see that kind of advertising had actually shut out a lot of would-be readers. And for those of you that have read The Economist, actually there's a much greater wealth of content that's in there that would appeal to a much broader audience than just people who are working in Canary Wharf.
Science, culture, technology, etc., not just a financially driven publication.
Well, exactly, and it's of course there's loads of content in there about business and finance and economics. I mean, the clue is in the name.
And also there's a particular sort of customer journey, wasn't it? This idea of the Economist epiphany when you read a couple of articles. Do you want to talk us through what was the basic insight there?
Yeah, I mean, that was the striking thing. So again, the research that was done through the focus groups that BBDO had done was great in that as we started to look at, people we were looking at subscribers, we were asking them, what was it that made you take the plunge, made you become a subscriber of The Economist, and actually what came through really was everybody talked about this moment where all of a sudden, The Economist, they'd picked up an Economist, they'd read a particular article, perhaps an article on sustainability, and an environmentalist had picked it up, and all of a sudden, they had this Economist epiphany that actually there was content in there that was not only for them, but actually that was kind of written in a way that made it very simplistic, very easy to understand. So there was these kind of epiphany moments that we kind of cottoned onto. But also, I think some people just didn't realise that the content was there. So not only was it content, there was a lot of breadth in the content. Actually, some of the content was just completely unexpected, very provocative, ground that you just wouldn't have expected The Economist to cover. And that often was the very first thing that got people to just start reading it, and that led them on to maybe some of the more meaty content that's within.
So the basic idea was you would use content from The Economist. It's more provocative headlines, let's be honest. Brew your own heroin isn't your standard Economist article.
There's not a lot of heroin content in The Economist now.
Yes, I'm very disappointed to cancel that. But you would take those provocative headlines, you would make them available through programmatic media on relevant websites. So I might be reading about police brutality in the States, and then I might see a headline which says, have the US police gone ballistic? I would click on that because I think that's kind of interesting, it's relevant to what I'm reading. And that would take me through to a hub, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was the case. So I think when we realised that these Economist epiphany moments were happening, in terms of setting out the media strategy, the whole marketing strategy, I think we were just thinking, well, how do we make these moments happen more often, and how can media make these moments happen? And to us, it was a very personal experience. So if you look at we didn't think that the maybe broader media would create a really personal epiphany moment. What we felt was actually it was the content itself, which is the product, that was creating these moments. And actually, if we could just get the right content to the right person, that these moments would happen. And so we set about building audiences that were going to be right for The Economist, that were progressives. We started with The Economist's own first-party data set. We merged that in our own audience management platform. We have a and we fuse that with second-party data that we have partnerships with third-party data to enrich it. And actually what we ended up with was 6-7 distinct segments who were globally curious, who were progressive people who The Economist content would resonate with, but who were defined by their interest. So be it politics, be it tech, be it environmentalist issues. Once we had those segments, they were there for us to be able to target. We then used a dynamic ad server, and what that allowed us to do was to scan. So once we had the segments built, we would be buying against those audiences, but it was also important to serve in the right context. So we profiled the audience out, figured out where they would be, made sure that the investment strategy was there so that we could be in those environments. And then we added one final layer, which was, as I say, the dynamic ad server, which was able to scan the page. It was able to understand what the nature of the content was on the page. It then looked back at the Economist website and made a match of the best article that we had to the content on the page, the person that we were serving to. And that's where we saw some of those great results.
And how did you avoid the kind of ad practice in programmatic that we see? Either people being continually seeing the same ads, whichever sites they go on, or alternatively, those ads appearing on inappropriate websites?
Yeah, I mean, the answer actually is with great difficulty. So,
Is it actually possible to prevent those things?
Yeah, well, I mean, we think so. I think, it's... I mean, one, it is a big problem. I think the problem is because the digital world is so fragmented, and you know, there are so many wall gardens that you have to I guess, jump over, that, you know, you have to use this bit of tech to get to Google's inventory, you have to use this bit of tech to get to Yahoo's data. And unfortunately, those are frequency silos. And then you look at, you know, the amount of devices out there and just trying to stitch those up to an actual person. And again, you've got frequency silos. So it's really difficult to do. I mean, our approach is to, firstly, as we've already said, we've got an audience management platform that is a people-based audience building platform. And because we build those audiences centrally, instead of building audiences with several different partners in silo, we feel that because we've got that audience centrally, we're pushing them out to partners, actually we can be really measured in the way that we push those audiences. Because we've got those audiences central, we then can understand the frequency build or push different audiences to different partners to make sure that we're not
so maybe
frequency.
the right tools or refining the right tools could help you.
It's a little bit of that for sure.
And we shouldn't give the impression that this is just about machines and automation. It's obviously called Magic and Machines in terms of the name of the film.
Yeah.
And the point was made there that you were using both this kind of automatically created content, you know, taken from Economist headlines, but also crafted content. So someone was working on it to make it more provocative, and the crafted kind outperformed the automated kind. So, I mean, is that likely to be always the case, do you think, or is it just a matter of time before machine learning catches up with human craft?
It's an interesting question. I think it's actually a lot more difficult to make the distinction. I don't think it's as easy as man versus machines. I think that in every single approach, there's somebody who is, you know, who's designing that framework, who's running those machines. But I do take your point. I mean, what we found is. We had a blended approach in the end. There is no doubt that the creative that came down from the proximity guys, that was, you know, more crafted. That was the copy was written by a creative person. It outperformed the dynamic creative that was built on the fly. The main reason for that, we found, actually, is, like we said, we managed to build this system that could, you know, that could scan the page we were about to serve on, and it could, you know, scan the entire Economist library and figure out which article was the best match. What it couldn't do is, and unfortunately, the dynamic ad server would build the ad out of the article headline, and of course, the article headline was written by an editorial person, and it was for an Economist subscriber. You know, what it wasn't for is a progressive who's never read The Economist.
A sampler.
Exactly, and so what the machine can't do is write really witty, pithy ad copy. And so I guess until IBM Watson figures out how to do that, you know, the creatives in the room's jobs are safe. And
I mean, a bit like the Direct Line case, this wasn't just about the marketing department. There was a different way of working, wasn't there, between the client and the agencies in terms of using the content. You were working more closely, I think. This is to you, Neil.
Oh, sorry, it was me. Sorry, I thought it was to Richard.
You were working more closely. Just, I see that there's a sort of comparison, I think.
With the proximity teams and Economist.
Economist content people, the Economist marketing people.
Yeah, I mean, we've just talked about, I guess, man and machine, but actually it was a lot around the process and collaboration that, you know, we had with the Economist team as well as proximity team. So, you know, I think, yes, it was communication. We were on, at one point, daily calls to make sure that, you know, as the campaign was being set up, that we were all singing from the same hymn sheet. And it's crucial. I mean, if you have a content marketing strategy, the one thing is that it's actually very thirsty, and in order to be relevant and to get content out quickly, you know, The Economist writes so many articles on a weekly basis, you know, you need a system that is very slick, and the only way you can do that is by working together. So, I suppose there was, interestingly, for a group of people who were working on The Economist, there's no room for politics, right? You know, everybody had to just get on. And so, yeah, so what we did was we had a technology in place whereby proximity could build ads directly into the ad server, therefore getting rid of any kind of creative bottleneck. We also, you know, we would be very open about the media strategy, about the audiences that we were building, so that they knew that the articles would fit into those audiences. And then finally, you know, The Economist were having all these conversations with their editorial team to make sure that we could get content that was going to be provocative enough to actually, you know, move the dial. So, yeah, I think it was a collaborative approach, and I think the last piece I think was that really helped was we had a web-hosted dashboard, so the media performance was actually able, the proximity team could access it as well, and that gave them an immediate instant steer on what content was working, which ads were performing best, which ad copy, which style ads were the ones that were performing best. So.
I just wanted to bring Neil Godber in, because you obviously were deputy convener of judges in the last cycle of the awards, so you saw this case. I mean, what do you think of the merits of this in terms of as a demonstration that programmatic can serve both a clear commercial objective but also the brand, changing the brand perception?
Well, to some extent it feels like that's one of the challenges that most creative agencies are fundamentally wrestling with. It feels like a brilliant way of trying to both build a brand but also do it within a highly trackable, traceable, dynamic environment, applying sort of almost like craft and creativity to technology. So it feels like one of the only cases, certainly that we saw in this, or in the last crop of entries, and if you think more widely, who has used sort of targeting and programmatic in a way that's highly creative and has drawn an almost instant ROI, who's done it well? And I genuinely would sort of put that out there as a sort of a challenge and a test to say what is working brilliantly well. Because one sort of sometimes hears about cases, really old cases like sort of, Lynx or Axe and Romeo Reboot and things of that nature, where you're talking about 1,500 iterations. And there are some new things, I think, from Yoplait and the like, but there are very, very few cases that you could honestly hold up in front of a client or in front of your own creative agency and say, this is what we're going for. The second part I think is interesting is because a lot of the time, creative agencies still, the sort of the creative output can be sort of essentialist in some way. So I think you're looking for that one sort of universal, almost like unit of currency, whether that be video or whether that be an individual image. And I think it's a brilliant example of saying, what if we were to produce a massive pool of content and then use that to push out and engage people in the right environment? That feels a really interesting, progressive way of doing it. And I think that, yes, there are brands that produce content that's sort of long-form content, it's educational, but to kind of cut through, break through, generate the desire to move people through, I don't see many brands doing that well.
Through to the revenue opportunity.
Absolutely.
The subscription.
I think it's a great case. All the judges thought it was an exceptional case.
Well, Richard, we talked about in the digital era, is it more difficult to get to sell in that big creative idea and that big creative approach as opposed to a number of different digital executions on a more participation model?
Well, I think what this case shows, the direct line case, is that it is by having a central idea, not a central executional idea, or even perhaps creative idea, but a sense that this business is about fixing, not an insurance company. That's our starting point for creating work that works ahead of the purchase process, and stuff that's working in the last sort of 5 minutes of the purchase process. So I'm going to say, at the moment, I'm still minded to believe that central galvanizing thought can help inform everything that you do.
Mm-hmm. I suppose you could say that because it's based on the Economist content, there's already been a long history of branding that's let people know, at least the existing audience, what the brand stands for, which this is building on. It's obviously challenging the perceptions amongst the non-users, but when you get there, you have a sense of...
they clearly have a very clear sense of who they are as a brand. And one of the things I love about this case study is its kind of contextual media planning, and we've lost that skill or that belief that actually the context in which you consume our work is as important as the actual message. And I think it's a really helpful sort of fight back against the obsession with individual targeting, regardless of where that communication is seen.
I saw you nodding. Does that mean in the 2018 awards we should see more good use of programmatic, more contextual media planning?
No, I was actually nodding because sometimes, not sort of through work for the IPA, but from other work that I do, it almost feels like context is everything, as opposed to the creative and the content that goes in it. And to some extent, there's that sort. I think there's been a lot of play back and forth between sort of organisations that would just say, look, fundamentally the desire just exists. There's a huge kind of pool of this stuff, and your job is really just to kind of get in there, tap into it, and sort of pull people along. And to a large extent, your ability to do that is driven, A, by things like the customer journey and sort of UX, CX, and so on and so forth, but B, just being around at the right time. So, you know, by being able to talk to someone who is stood on a curbside at 2 a.m. and desperate for a cab, and do you know what I mean? That'll do all the heavy lifting, as opposed to applying creativity and a sort of an organising thought to actually make an impact and generate that. And it feels like it's only now that people are starting to properly engage with both sides of that.
We're going to open up to questions in a minute, but I know you wanted to talk about 3 and the Art Fund as just other cases that illustrate this back to basics idea.
Yeah, I don't want to hold us up for questions, but yeah.
Very quickly, you've got a minute. As they say on the Today programme, you've got 30 seconds to answer this question.
Word. Okay, that's really hard. Okay, so we love the Art Fund. It's a very small case, microscopic budgets. It was the sort of epitome of a modern-day organisation, in that the Art Fund is there as an art preservation charity, and that's its purpose. It has a very overt stated purpose. So for everybody wrestling with brand purposes, they had a very clearly articulated one, and they doubled down because they had a sort of social dimension to that. 101 we thought were exceptional in saying that isn't working, let's go back, research amongst the consumers, what do they genuinely want what do they genuinely want, and what are the benefits that they get from donating to this organisation. And I love the fact that they went from a sort of noble purpose about preserving art for the nation to actually it's money off that I want. And you can imagine that sell of turning up, and I can imagine the organisation, and you say, actually, it's not all about pushing towards having these brilliant sort of artefacts that are part of the nation. Actually, they just want it for money off. They want discounts. So I love that part. The second part I think is very good is, rather than just doing advertising, what they then did was to say, how can we genuinely reframe the conversation? How can we get this sort of donation and money used? They changed that into a card. So they then designed a membership card. So they sort of productized it and then advertised the product, as opposed to just saying, you get money off with this card. Now, they dressed it up and they made it feel very sort of palatable, and the idea about never without art is brilliant, but fundamentally the core benefit was about money off.
I should say in the 2018 awards you can enter new product development, new service development.
New products, new services.
Have to be comms in the sort of traditional sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. The second one, and I won't spend long on this, is 3. I think everybody knows about 3 and holiday spam.
Sorry.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So yeah, again, you know, in a market that was either driven by sort of very high purpose and being the oxygen of the age, or creativity, or just being absolutely swamped by sort of minutes off, the agency were brilliant in as much as they then went back and said, right, fundamentally, what is going to appeal to people, and what hacks them off about using their network? And they saw that roaming charges when you go abroad is the sort of massive, massive bugbear. They then persuaded the organisation to run, well, essentially to change the service itself to offer no roaming charges, which is a big deal. So not only did they put together a proposal that did that, they then went back and said, okay, well, if we soft launch this thought, get users to use it, what do they use it for? And they very quickly saw that actually, I think they used something like 71 times more data, which is pretty terrifying. However, the majority use of that data was about social platforms, and the majority of the use was essentially all about bragging and saying, aren't I having an amazing time? And that sort of gives you the nucleus for the whole campaign. What they then did was not just say, look, isn't it marvellous that we allow all these people to brag? They then flipped that over and said, no, what if we as an organisation create a sort of public corporate apology for the fact that we're allowing these people to pollute the internet with all this horrific sort of spamming content about how marvellous a time they're having? So if you like, the media approach, both in terms of targeting, is brilliant, but at a kind of macro level, it's really idea-led, and the sort of, if you like, the big thought is more about how would a corporation say sorry? So then you go, right, how would BP say sorry? How did M&S say sorry? How did those other, other companies, corporations, countries say sorry? And we'll take that as the principles that we drive the mass marketing approach.
Okay.
So,
right, wasn't a minute, but never mind. Thank you. Right, who has a question for our esteemed panel, including our convener of judges? So now's your chance to ask about the new prizes that are available in this year's 2018 awards. Paul.
Thank you. A question apropos of The Economist, really, which was a sort of relatively new story to me. 64,000 extra subscribers, I think you said. Do you think there are any lessons here for the future of print media more generally?
Lessons in what way? I mean, obviously, I think in terms of the strategy, it was maybe atypical of the category. You know, I think the Economist model, in terms of its you know, its financial model, its commercial model, is dual funded, so it's ad funded as well as it is a subscriber newspaper. And so I think, you know, it's no secret that the publishing world is under threat. It's finding it incredibly difficult to monetize. And so I think, you know, I can see that more publishers are going to have to go behind a subscription paywall. But I think in doing that, I think, you know, you still need to tease out your content. I think you still need to be able to communicate what it is that you stand for, as well as show that actually you have content that is worthwhile paying for. And so I think that's really, I guess, at the heart of our strategy. It's putting the product first and letting that do the talking, and then making people realize actually that quality content, there is so much, as Marsha was saying, there is so much content out there. Actually putting a price on it almost shows the value of it.
It's surprising, isn't it, when you look at very good campaigns, Own the Weekend from the Guardian, Observer, or the Sunday Times campaign. It's much more about the occasion of using, you know, why you would use the Guardian at the weekend or the Sunday Times on the Sunday. It's not about the actual content. That's not centre.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting approach for them. I think, you know, we've obviously seen this approach work extremely well for us, but it isn't the only. It's not the only thing that we're doing.
If I was a print brand, news brand, and the Newsworks are sponsoring today, but I think I take heart from the fact that you're showing that the context, the editorial, and a match between editorial and advertiser is a winning combination, and that's what I think we've lost, and that's what I would, if I was the Guardian or the Express or whatever, I'd be kind of going, that's a powerful tool, and I want a premium for that advertising service that I'm providing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And I think, you know, I think it's a blend of the two approaches. I think there's, you know, as the Les and Peter have already said, there is a blend between, you know, brand storytelling as well as there is more activational and maybe more content approach. I think that overall mix, ultimately you've got the product and what it is that we do, but then also we've got what the Economist stand for. And I think increasingly, as our measurement approach is getting a little bit more sophisticated and we've gone beyond last touch, we're getting a bit more braver in that area, and we're starting to think about how we can tell brand stories and position ourselves, you know, as what we stand for, as well as just pushing out the content and getting people to make, well, driving those epiphanies that we've seen as being so effective.
Okay. Another question from the audience? Okay, I shall just mention then these two new prizes we have in the 2018 awards. So first is very straightforward, the Social Works Prize for the most effective use of social media. Doesn't have to be the only channel, I would be surprised if it was, but a channel, which is a new award. And also the President's Prize, which is for, you have to correct me here, tech-led creativity, strategy, implementation. It's the tech-led aspect, isn't it? Tech-led data, sorry. So it's the use of data collected by technology in any aspect of the campaign. So something like The Economist would have been an example. Okay.
We enter it again, or?
You can.
Sure.
Indeed. Right. I don't mean to keep you from your lunch then if there's no more questions. It just remains for me to thank my panel, ask you to thank them, and thank you very much for coming to the IPA for this morning.
Thank you, please. Yes, so if you are going to enter these awards this year, you can find all the information about how to do so on the IPA website. The deadline for entries is the 20th of April.